In this lesson, we'll learn a technique to create complex curvilinear forms using a few simple steps. Now, what we'll be working on in this case is the facade of our building. Now, when I was thinking about the design of it, I started looking at the 3D model and I started imagining a few things in my head, and then I wanted to bring you back to an important lesson when designing any building. Try not to do all of the design work in 3D. So what I did is I created a quick render. I created a new camera that would clearly show this facade, and then I went and printed it out and overlaid it with a few hand sketches. Now remember, when you don't have a lot of time, thinking with your hands is much quicker than thinking with your mouse and your keyboard trying to model different options up. Obviously, you will be able to get much more work done and many more different options done as a sketch overlay if you're running out of time in any project. Especially remember that your mind can think better through your hand than it can through a computer. And then obviously once you've shortlisted a few options, you can then go and test them out. So what I will be doing in this case is creating quite a complex facade, but why I chose this design is because I wanted something that is ultra light. I didn't want to have glass panels. I didn't want to have polycarbonate panels. I rather wanted to create a simple inflated pneumatic facade that will literally just be large sheets of plastic that get inflated from both sides, and basically the rigidity would be thanks to that double curvilinear form that it would have. So what we're going to do after that facade, just while we're looking at the sketch, is we're going to then afterwards create these pods that are going to be interlinked amongst each other, where we'll have little expo areas underneath. So that's just some of the design thinking as I'm sketching over each step in 3D Max, and doing this is very important even if you think you don't have the time to sketch anything out. So a few of the ideas here are a few directions that the pneumatic ripples could go in. Either they could be horizontal, vertical, or they could flow in this direction. Obviously, I don't want to make this building look too organic. I want to rather make it represent what is man-made in this world, but I know that these type of patterns are also found in many of the man-made objects that we have, but I'm especially using it because of the lightness and the translucency. So here we have a plan. You can see how crude these sketches are. They literally took a couple of seconds, and I'm showing them to you just to show you that I don't go into too much detail and I don't fuss with trying to make things look too perfect. So let's go ahead and work on one of these facades. First of all, what I'd like to do is to just make my base object the same size as the steel frame that we created. That means we need to enlarge the sides ever so slightly. So I'm going to convert this down to editable poly. And I'm basically just going to adjust my base object because my facade is going to be based on that reference object. So I'm going to increase that by 1 meter, and the side will also be increased by 1 meter. That means now that I can use this facade and I can use it as my reference point. So what I'm going to do now is create a single plane object that I'm then going to convert into my facade. And then in your own time, you can go and work on the others. I'm going to do that before the next lesson. I will then apply this facade. I will instance it to the side and do the same thing for these two. So that part I'm going to do off camera, since it will be just a repeated step. So next I'm going to create a plane. I'm going to choose auto grid, so make sure that that is checked. And you can see that your UCS starts to change as you move around. Keep your snap on, and then you will be able to create a plane on the front facade. So the next thing you want to do is to make the width and the length segments correspond, or you can basically make it work with your design. So in this case, I'm going to choose 14 so that I have one vertical line per structural line. I'm just keeping to the same module, and then I'm going to divide it in half vertically. I'm going to then isolate this, and we can start working on our facade. So if you remember from the sketch, we want to get a type of vertically running diagonal pattern that looks like we have these inflated bubbles that are basically interweaved amongst each other. So it's quite a complex form, but we're going to look at a few techniques now that can make that complex form a lot simpler. So first of all, let's start by adding an editable poly, and then I'd like to bring up the graphite modeling tools. Now I like to use this because it has some very interesting options when it comes to using the topology. So this is one of my favorites. I like to use several of these options. So the one I'm going to choose here is Hive. And you can see as well that you can first go and subdivide your entire object. So let's choose to first tessellate it. and let's tessellate it just once, and then let's go back to that same hive option, and then let's see what result we get. So that already looks quite good. So I'm going to stick to this, and next thing I'm going to do is to create a bubble effect. So this is now going to be representative in the outline of where these bubbles are going to be. We can see these points over here where the bubbles meet is where we can have attachment points. So we can create a clamped area that can be held back where they can be supported if need be, or otherwise we can just rely on the actual structure of itself to hold it up. So you can start thinking about these key elements. This basically sets up a new grid for you. So to create the bubble effect, what we're going to do is to add another editable poly, and we're going to select all of the polygons. Next, you can right click and go into inset, and then just choose by polygon. Then you can inset it by a amount that you believe to be correct without necessarily these points starting to cross over. So you want to choose a point just before that. So perhaps over there looks good. Then you want to take all of these polys that you've inset and you want to move them outwards ever so slightly. And this is what's going to create that volume to the air that's going to be on the inside. Next, we're going to use a mesh smooth. But what I wanted to show you is that if you apply mesh smooth to the entire object, just by typing mesh and going down and enter, you'll see that these corners get rounded off. So what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck apply to whole mesh, and within the editable poly we're just going to select the border, control click the vertice, and then control I to invert that selection. That means that all the vertices will be selected besides the ones on the outside. Now when we go to mesh smooth, you'll see that only the mesh itself has been smoothed. So you'll see the effect that we have is now this very gentle looking inflated facade. So you can increase that bubble effect by moving out that poly within your editable poly modifier. Now the last thing I'm going to do is within this is to go and make an instance of it. So I'm going to mirror instance it to the left to create the other half of the bubble. So I'm going to click on mirror, and then that's in the X direction, and you can also just increase that spacing slightly if you like. Now if you have a look at it in 3D, you'll see the effect that we've created is basically we have this double curvilinear form. And that is pretty much it. That's all I wanted to show you in this lesson, is basically how you can use a simple single object starting with a simple plane and then apply different layers onto it. It's exactly the same technique that I used to create the space frame, but here we created something that looks much more organic, but still the same principle applies. And this is really the biggest speed modeling tip, is that use simple objects at the bottom of your stack and you will always find a much quicker and simpler method to get things done. Don't try and create these out of separate bubbles that are mesh smoothed and instanced around as separate objects. So what you'll see, the scene already looks very, very complex, but actually if you just remove all the modifiers, it's just a box. And that's exactly the sort of secret tip that I can communicate to you. So I'm going to now move on in the next lesson. After having copied this same object around, I'm going to do the same thing by dividing this 30 times and doing the same process. And once we are done with this, then we can look at perhaps the bottom base of our building, and we can start to create these interlinking pods. And that same methodology of interlinking the pods is what's going to interlink the entire base platform with the riverbank on the side here as well. So we can start to look at how we can go and design that in the next lesson.